Watch this. This Taoist claims to be Zhongnan Mountain Celestial Master Modezen to exorcise demons for a family. He laid out ink lines in the room and started performing a shamanic dance. But before the Taoist could show his power, he was subdued by a grandma who passed away years ago. Strangely, though, the grandma didn't torment the Taoist. Instead, using the Taoist's body, she ran to Zhang Zha, who was fixing a pipe, and suddenly hit him. This is outrageous! Xiao Ye, watching nearby, was instantly displeased. He grabbed the Taoist's head, and with a crackling sound, forced the old lady out. Afterwards, when Xiao Ye asked Zhang Zha if he saw the shadow clearly, Zhang Zha couldn't help but look at the photo on the wall. Everyone immediately understood. Of course, the noise attracted the mother's attention. But when she came out, the living room was already calm. About what just happened, Xiao Ye said nothing. Instead, he asked the mother about the photo on the wall. The mother was a bit surprised, but told him anyway. She said it was her mother-in-law, Shao Ka's grandma. Hearing this, Zhang Zha and the others were stunned. That's not right. Could this grandma be crazy? Actually hurting her own granddaughter? Seeing their strange looks, the mother was puzzled and asked Xiao Ye why he asked about it. Since the old woman had passed away for years, Xiao Ye couldn't explain clearly and changed the subject, asking about the woman's husband instead. Hearing this, the mother suddenly fell silent. After a long pause, she said resentfully, "That bastard owes a lot of debts and hasn't come back for years. My mother-in-law was angered to death by him. Even at her last moment, he didn't even come back to see her." Hearing this, everyone felt somber. But they didn't notice the portrait in the living room suddenly changing. In the originally black and white photo, the grandma's eyes suddenly glowed blue, and even the framed glass started to crack. Just then, the awakened Taoist suddenly startled them. The Taoist was touching his head, stunned. After a moment's thought, he looked at everyone seriously and asked if he was possessed just now. Hearing this, Zhang Zha and the others nodded subconsciously, but the Taoist fell silent. Suddenly, he jumped up like a monkey and roared furiously. "Outrageous! How dare you possess the body of Zhongnan Mountain Celestial Master? Today, I, the Taoist, will make you vanish into thin air." Then he tore open his robe and smeared blood from his bitten finger on his forehead, drawing a large blood talisman. Then a familiar scene unfolded. Xiao Ye frowned. He felt like he'd seen this somewhere before. Zhang Zha's cheap master was even more blunt, directly stating that this Taoist wasn't one of them. But strangely, as the Taoist posed awkwardly, a thunderclap suddenly sounded outside. Instantly, an eerie atmosphere spread, and the mother looked worriedly towards her daughter in the room. But as the second thunderclap sounded, everyone was shocked to see several dark shadows suddenly emerge behind the Taoist, some even drilling out from the surrounding walls. Why are there so many apparitions suddenly? Zhang Zha was stunned. This feeling was awful, reminding him of the time he was surrounded by monsters yelling to open the door. Thinking of this, a wave of nausea surged up. Luckily, Zhang Zha, realizing this, quickly covered his mouth. This strange behavior naturally worried Xiao Ye. Seeing Xiao Ye's gaze, Zhang Zha felt ashamed and guiltily said sorry, because he felt these apparitions might have been attracted by him. Unexpectedly, Xiao Ye suddenly laughed, and his master bluntly said, "Don't be so sentimental. These guys are just here to take shelter from the rain. But if my disciple is in trouble, how can I, as his master, stand idly by?" He called out, "Sun Zha," and then pulled out the copper coin mask. Seeing this, Zhang Zha blushed. He no longer cared that his master always mispronounced his name, but was incredibly moved, even hesitatingly asking, "Are you really going to give me this treasure?" However, his master's next words made his face fall. "The rental fee for the mask is 100 per use." Seeing the two of them like this, Xiao Ye suddenly laughed, relieved. But now was not the time for jokes, because the apparitions were already coming. As for the Taoist, he was, of course, possessed again. He writhed and groaned, shouting things like traitors deserve to die. This second possession left everyone speechless, but it's unknown if they noticed the cracks gradually spreading across the grandma's photo frame. Just then, a scream suddenly came from the inner room. Xiaoka was terrifyingly flying again. Even behind the mother, the shadow of an apparition appeared. Xiao Ye rushed over without a word and struck out with his palm. Instantly, the apparition's head was split in two, and the mother also fainted on the ground. Then, Xiao Ye greeted the apparitions on the bed. Nothing special. He just advised them to do good and avoid evil. As he spoke, he began to form hand seals, lightning power flickering in his hands. But before the apparitions could react, an unexpected event occurred nearby. This event even stunned Xiao Ye. As for the living room, it was much simpler. Seeing the Taoist rushing towards him, Zhang Zha's master directly slapped him hard. And so, the poor Taoist spun and flew out. Although the Taoist was agile, managing to regain his balance in midair, this didn't pique the master's interest. Instead, he gestured for Zhang Zha to watch closely, as if about to give a live demonstration. At this moment, the Taoist charged again. Of course, the master slapped him again, as before. But this time he added, saying that using this method to deal with apparitions possessing people is useless. Their real weakness is here. As he said this, he picked up a back-scratcher and poked it at the Taoist's temple. This strike was indeed effective. The Taoist's eyes rolled back and he collapsed. At the same time, an apparition wailed and floated out. The master didn't even look, but just swung his hand and chopped, instantly vanquishing the evildoer on the spot. Zhang Zha was stunned by this decisive action. At this point, the master didn't attack again, but coldly stared at the other shadows in the room and said disdainfully, "Get lost, all of you." And in the blink of an eye, all the apparitions fled without a trace. Looking at the room that had returned to calm again, Zhang Zha's eyes were full of admiration for his master. Then they went to the inner room. Xiao Ye stood silently, saying nothing, and the mother had also woken up and was calling out Xiaoka's name. Seeing the color gradually returning to her daughter's face, the mother was excited. Zhang Zha asked in confusion, How is she?" Xiao the grinned and said, "She's fine." As soon as he finished speaking, the girl suddenly opened her eyes and called out, "Mom." Seeing this scene, Zhang Zha couldn't help but feel happy. However, after waking up, the girl suddenly said she had dreamed of her grandma. Hearing this, Zhang Zha's expression immediately turned serious, because only they knew about the little girl being possessed. It was likely deeply connected to her grandma. However, the girl suddenly said with a smile, "I dreamed that Grandma came to save me." As soon as she said this, Zhang Zha was instantly stunned. How could this be? Shouldn't it be Zhaoke's grandma who's been haunting her? Actually, before this, even Xiao the had thought so. But it wasn't until he reprimanded those spirits that he realized what the girl's grandma had truly done. At that moment, he seemed to understand something. That spirits are just a form of thought. And thoughts can be good or evil. After all, they were once human beings too. These spirits return with all sorts of intentions. Perhaps longing, or perhaps to protect. And some just want to come back for one last look at the world they once lived in. But without exception, they all cannot avoid a gateway, which is the spirit mediator. So from then on, Xiao the understood his mission as a Chu Wu. It shouldn't just be about eliminating spirits and spirit mediators, but maintaining balance, which is to punish evil and preserve good. Just like before they set out this time, his elder brother asked him, asking how he planned to handle Zhang Zha's situation. At that time, he didn't answer directly, but told a story instead. It was about how every time he was alone in that room, he could always hear the mournful cries from the jar. So he felt that the mission of Chu Wu might not be just that, but to find a way to restore spirit mediators back to normal humans. Therefore, Zhang Zha, who could recover from being a spirit mediator to normal, gave him a chance to find the answer. Hearing this, Zhang Zha was a little touched, because he saw hope. But then, he suddenly felt something wasn't right. There are so many people in the room. Why did the old grandma specifically attack me? Xiao the smiled when he heard this. Don't you get it? Because you are a spirit mediator. She was afraid you were here to harm her granddaughter. These words. Then, Xiao the handed a slip of paper to Zhaoke's mother, saying these are some traditional Chinese medicine prescriptions to nourish and replenish your qi. Use these for conditioning, and Zhao Ka will recover soon. Of course, it's not just that. We also need to completely resolve the hidden danger here. Third brother immediately understood and directly pressed a palm against the wall. In an instant, a force of thunder and lightning enveloped the entire building, even extending to the surrounding yards. In this way, this place will never be invaded by evil entities again. Of course, Zhang Zha didn't see anything, and just thought his master was showing off. However, the matter was resolved, and it was time to leave. Zhaoke's mother, deeply grateful, offered Zhao the some cash, but Zhao the politely refused. After all, this trip hadn't been in vain for them, because that old Taoist priest seemed to have dropped a lot of loot. And Zhang Zha at this moment was discussing with his master which loot to take. To this, his master's suggestion was, take it all, leave nothing behind. Xiao was speechless. He quickly urged them to prepare to leave, because their next destination was Huangbai Village. Of course, it was unclear whether Xiao said it so loudly on purpose. After Zhao mother heard this name, she suddenly stopped. Her face was filled with disbelief, and she asked about the place they were going. Is it really called Huangbai Village? So, Zhao achieved his purpose. After he confirmed the name Huangbai Village with a smile, Zhao mother advised in a trembling voice, you really shouldn't go there, because our family escaped from that village. After learning about this hidden reason, Xiao quickly called Gong Ling. And Gong Ling at this moment was standing in the shadows, observing every move of the villagers, because she had discovered that there were indeed many strange things about this village. So after receiving information from Xiao, she was preparing to retreat first. However, as soon as she turned around, a rustling sound came from the woods. Gold, a relatively rare and precious metal, is now sewn into a boy's navel. The navel, to humans, is the origin of the 12 meridians and the source of the 5 vital organs and 6 viscera. So, what is the meaning of sewing gold here? What could it be? The aloof uncle, a prominent figure in the Chu Wu gang, was puzzled. He didn't understand what exactly these colleagues from 300 years ago were trying to do. And this strange phenomenon naturally drew Xiao over. He picked up a piece of gold and examined it closely. Though he seemed to sense something, he remained silent. However, Xiao went to the next room, naturally not leaving Zhang Zha alone. So, just like before, he called for third brother again. Thus, a familiar scene unfolded once more. As for Zhang Zha, he was so embarrassed his toes could dig out 3 acres of land. Fortunately, this strange atmosphere didn't last long, because Xiao and the others came out from the inner room. However, at this moment, the aloof uncle was holding a jar in his hands. The atmosphere was a bit somber. Zhang Zha couldn't help but feel nervous. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, "What's in the jar?" But no one responded to him, because although Zhang Zha asked, the answer seemed to be obvious already. Upon realizing this, Zhang Zha also fell silent. He looked at the jar, as if looking at himself. Xiao patted Zhang Zha, who was frozen in place, and said that the one who led him to the amusement park might be this boy, because that place is where the boy was once buried, and before they met, the boy had been sealed in the coffin for over 300 years. Therefore, Zhang Zha's appearance was like giving him a long-awaited release. Speaking of which, Xiao suddenly called out Zhang Zha, preparing to take him out for some fresh air. Zhang Zha subconsciously followed, because his heart was already in turmoil. He did need some release. But just then, an arm draped over his shoulder. He looked and saw it was that back-scratcher uncle. Zhang Zha suddenly sobered up. Perhaps at this moment, he no longer needed to relax. Indeed, the expected strange atmosphere still arrived. He saw the back-scratcher placed near Zhang Zha's ear, gesturing for a whisper. Then, that creepy, warm breath came to his ear. And that weird uncle said something that intrigued him. So, just as Zhang Zha stepped out the door, that weird uncle cleared his throat, preparing to announce something. And that was from today onwards. This Li Za would be his disciple. Zhang Zha was speechless. He had clearly told him his name no less than twice. Aren't you going to quickly bow and greet your master? The weird uncle's reminder immediately snapped him back to reality. Zhang Zha didn't care if his name was right or not, and immediately bowed respectfully. So from this moment on, he just like that had a master on the cheap. And the first thing after becoming a disciple was for the master to take his disciple to tour the master's mansion. As for Xiao Ye, who originally intended to take Zhang Zha out to relax, he was also dumbfounded by this sudden turn of events. At this moment, Master took Zhang Zha to an elegant courtyard and pointed to the surrounding houses, asking him what he thought, and which one he planned to buy. Zhang Zha was once again bewildered upon hearing this. Could this master have amnesia? Thinking of this, he quickly explained, saying he wasn't there to buy a house. Unexpectedly, as soon as these words came out, the master actually frowned and asked him, "Then what are you looking for me for?" Well, could this master's memory not even last for 3 minutes? Speechless, Zhang Zha quickly told him about their previous whispered conversation, which was on the condition of becoming a disciple to restore himself to a normal person. Fortunately, the master should not have forgotten this matter. He pondered for a moment, and suddenly said seriously, "Zhang Zha's current physique is extremely attractive to things like Shang. So, those Shang wandering outside will slowly gather around Zhang Zha, and thus affect those around him. And this is the reason why Zhang Zha became a jinx. Therefore, the first step to becoming a normal person again is to start by preventing the approach of Shang." Upon hearing this well-reasoned explanation, Zhang Zha's eyes lit up. He asked his master with a face full of surprise, "How exactly can I do that?" Then he saw his master take out a copper coin mask. Seeing this object, he immediately remembered that when he was previously tied up here, he seemed to have worn this thing. The master explained, "This thing is called the 5 Emperor's Coins Mask. It can ward off evil and dispel misfortune. Wearing this, not only will evil things dare not approach, but it will also help prevent and treat Zhang Zha's spitting blood problem. In addition to that, there's an even more important point, and that is, wearing it is very cool." Hearing this, Zhang Zha already admired his master immensely. This mask sounded like it was tailor-made for him. Unexpectedly, Master suddenly held the mask up in front of his eyes and said, "Only sells for 19,888 per mask." As soon as these words came out, Zhang Zha's eyes instantly became clear. Master was a bit puzzled and again waved the mask in front of his disciple's eyes. But Zhang Zha remained unmoved. After holding back for a while, Zhang Zha said somewhat obediently, "I don't have any money." So, his master quickly put away the treasure. And this scene also fell completely into the eyes of Xiao Ye and the other. They seemed to be quite accustomed to this, and the aloof uncle summoned a crow, letting it smell the gold nugget in his hand, and then looked at Xiao Ye. He wanted to confirm whether what the gang leader said was credible. Zhao hesitated and nodded slightly, because from his intuition, that person wouldn't deceive him. At that time, the gang leader told him the origin of that coffin. He said that the coffin was bought from a local resident. That was more than 10 years ago. This coffin had just been unearthed. He thought it was an antique, so he bought it, planning to keep it for a high-priced resale later. But how would he know that there was actually a little boy inside this coffin? So, when he first opened the coffin, he lost many brothers. Xiao was immediately puzzled upon hearing this, clearly having learned from the past. Then why did you open the coffin again? The gang leader suddenly lowered his head and thought for a long time before saying, I just wanted to open it and see how well the child was preserved. He's lying! Xiao Ye saw through it at a glance. But the gang leader, in order to divert attention, actually threw out even more bombshell news. He said that the coffins unearthed that day were actually not just this one. If he remembered correctly, there were at least 2 or 3 identical red coffins. Hearing this, Zhao immediately became serious. He pressed further, asking, who exactly were the people who sold you the coffins? Suddenly asked this. It startled the gang leader. He said in a panic that he didn't remember anymore. Now his only impression is that person seemed to be a village chief, and that village seemed to be called Huangbai Village. Hearing the name Huangbai Village, the aloof uncle was also stunned. Xiao nodded, saying that Gongling had already checked this village. But unfortunately, there is almost no relevant information about Huangbai Village online. It seems as if someone doesn't want the outside world to know about this village. Hearing this, the aloof uncle silently released the crow, and instead stared at the gold nugget in his hand, lost in thought. The so-called Huangbai is the art of alchemy to transform into gold and silver. And now, all kinds of signs link the 2 characters Huang and Bai again. Then this Huangbai village must have problems. Xiao Ye smiled upon hearing this, and said he would go investigate. But the aloof uncle stopped him, because he wanted to find out how Zhao planned to handle Zhang Zha. And Zhang Zha, on his side, had tried every trick in the book. It was all to beg his master to rent him the mask temporarily, even offering to work to pay off the rent. Hearing this, the master, who initially seemed grumpy, seemed tempted. Coincidentally, a phone started ringing in the distance. So, at his master's command, Zhang Zha darted out suddenly. However, just as he picked up the phone, the voice inside startled him, because it was a woman's cry for help, accompanied by unsettling and strange sounds. Soon after, Xiao arrived, hearing the noise. He patted Zhang Zha on the shoulder, and then took the call. Just a few words were exchanged, and Xiao confirmed their next destination. He stared at Zhang Zha and said, "We've got a job." But if he went on this mission himself, what about Huangbai Village then? Thinking of this, he looked at the 3rd brother slumped on the ground in the distance, and suddenly had an idea. So he called out 3rd brother's nickname, Lao Ba. But just then, a figure suddenly appeared before him. It was Gongling.
他很干脆地说了一句：
I'll go. Hearing this, Xiao was a little worried. After all, Gongling hasn't rested much. If you push yourself like this, won't there be problems? Gongling knew what he was worried about.
是简单的说了一句。
This time, I'm just going to collect information. Okay then, Xiao didn't try to persuade her further, but reminded her to keep in touch. And Zhang Zha at this moment
还怔怔地盯着贴在门口的宣传海报出神。
couldn't believe what was written there. Is this something a group of guys is supposed to do? Online consultation? Xiao shouted to Zhang Zha again, pointedly, telling him to prepare to set off. And his cheap master, just like last time, stood up at the right moment.
打着哈欠说要去补个午觉。
But this time, Xiao didn't indulge him, and called out Lao Ba again. However, after shouting that, Xiao suddenly looked at Zhang Zha again. He said with a hint of regret, "Too bad, little Zaza. I'm afraid you won't get to see the strongest Chu Wu of our Lisong temple." The strongest Chu Wu? Just how strong is that? Zhang Zha asked curiously, but in the next moment he realized a large, slipper-clad foot suddenly appeared before his eyes. It turned out that the strongest Chu Wu Zhao was talking about was referring to his master. So, after arriving at their destination, Master looked quite impressed with himself, saying, "It has to be me personally to handle this." Only after getting out of the car did he remember to ask, "What's the task today?" Xiao, who was used to this, smiled and looked at the dilapidated building in front of him, saying, "This family has been plagued by evil spirits for a long time, especially the daughter, who is suffering greatly. So, the purpose of their trip is obvious." Hearing this, Zhang Zha's cheap master immediately understood. He said boastfully, "Liu Zha, today, watch closely as your master shows you how it's done." As soon as he said this, Zhang Zha seemed resigned, and even helpfully reminded his master, "Just call me Zhao Huang from now on." However, just as they were about to set off, Xiao noticed a black figure with an otherworldly and Taoist manner suddenly appeared behind them. The newcomer was dressed in ragged clothes, a Taoist priest in his 50s or 60s. And when the old Taoist priest walked up to them, he only said one sentence, "Gentlemen, your colleagues, right?" This is an old residential complex. A young mother is anxiously watching over her daughter at the bedside, wiping her arm with a gold nugget. But just then, the brazier placed in the center of the living room suddenly stirred. Seeing that something was wrong, the mother quickly got up to check. But she didn't expect that. She had only taken a few steps when a creaking sound came from behind her. Turning her head again, she found her daughter, who was originally lying in bed, suddenly floated up in an extremely strange posture. So she called Lisong Temple. A knock on the door came from outside. When she opened the door, she found that the person who came was an old Taoist priest with a scruffy beard, and there was a hint of imposing dignity. The old Taoist priest immediately stated his identity, saying he was Modezin, a heavenly master from Zhongnan Mountain. This brief introduction sounded very impressive. The mother quickly invited him in. Of course. She also saw the three young people following behind Heavenly Master Ma. Lao Ba strode forward, seeming to intend to introduce himself. But the mother was obviously one step ahead. She asked if they were Heavenly Master Ma's disciples. Lao Bo was unhappy to hear that. He was about to argue, but Zhao the greeted them with a smile, saying they were just here to help. So, they were politely invited into the house. The room had good lighting and ventilation. The room was also spotless. This naturally made everyone feel refreshed and happy. However, when they saw the girl in the inner room, their expressions suddenly became serious. The mother introduced to them, saying this was her daughter, named Zhao Ka. Her health has been poor since she was a child, and because of this, she has seen many doctors. But even so, her daughter's health is still deteriorating. So later, she tried to find a few masters. After those masters saw her, they all said that her daughter was haunted by something unclean, and it was a very fierce and vicious one. But while they said that, none of them could cure her. But she couldn't bear to see her daughter continue like this, with high fever and unconsciousness for days. There was no way around it. So today she contacted some more masters, wanting to try again. At this time, Heavenly Master Ma spoke. He said that judging from the girl's pulse, that thing might have penetrated deep into her internal organs. Hearing this, the mother panicked, because at this moment, she was most afraid of hearing anything about late stage or similar. Fortunately, Heavenly Master Ma calmly reassured her, saying that he would naturally take care of these things. Taking advantage of the opportunity while the two were talking, Zhao the quietly touched the girl's temple. As a streak of blue light flashed past, the girl suddenly unconsciously called out Mom. The mother was startled and quickly rushed to her daughter's bedside, asking with concern. Looking at this pitiful mother and daughter, Xiao Ye sighed inwardly. Then he quietly told his third brother what he had sensed. That is, this girl was indeed possessed, and that thing is still in this house. Although Zhang Zha didn't hear these words, he was still a little worried about the girl's condition. He didn't understand why a Shang would want to harass this girl. Seeing Zhang Zha become a curious baby again, Zhao suddenly smiled, saying that people with heavy yin energy naturally attract Shang. Moreover, this girl has been weak and sick for years. In this case, it would naturally attract the Shang's covetousness. They will take advantage of the weakness and enter, possessing the girl's body. Upon hearing the word possession, Zhang Zha was a little surprised. He didn't expect that. This kind of thing, only heard in folk tales, really existed. Seeing this, Zhao decided to explain it to him in detail, saying that Shang is essentially a kind of thought, or will after a person dies. In the beginning, they actually have no physical form. Therefore, these Shang borrow human bodies, after possessing them to achieve more concrete purposes, such as harming people's lives. Hearing this, Zhang Zha was shocked. He didn't understand why these Shang would want to harm people. Once you're dead, you're dead. Why do you still want to harm the world? Zhao shook his head. He said that not everyone is born good, and many people who die have lingering attachments. And these hatred and resentment are the reasons why they harm people. So, those Shang who return to this world are mostly malicious. However, Shang are also like people. They also need to replenish energy. They need to feed. And on humans, there happens to be the food they need. So they possess human bodies. Until the other person is completely drained and dies. But this does not mean the end, because they will continue to look for new targets. After learning all this, Zhang Zha became worried again. He wanted to know how to make this girl escape from the clutches of the demon. But Xiao Ye said with a smile, "Wait until dark, because Shang are afraid of sunlight. Once exposed to sunlight, they will soon be extinguished. So during the day, these Shang will hide in the dark, and only come out at night to feed. However, although there are places in the room that sunlight cannot reach, Xiao Ye didn't want to force it out prematurely, because he wanted to know why this Shang kept harassing this little girl. But there was still some time before dark. They couldn't just do nothing, could they?" Looking at Zhang Zha's eager expression, Xiao Ye was taken aback for a moment. He then remembered this kid Zhang Zha had already become third brother's disciple. In other words, they were considered fellow disciples. Thinking of this, he instructed Zhang Zha to find some objects with heavy yin energy and bring them to him, because those objects would also attract Shang. So, Zhang Zha started working energetically. But as soon as Zhang Zha left, he directly looked at the portrait hanging on the wall. Just then, the movement in the inner room caught Xiao Ye's attention, because he saw the mother holding a golden object, wiping her daughter's arm. Shocked, Xiao Ye quickly stepped forward, asking her what she was doing. The mother looked puzzled, saying she was exorcising evil spirits for her daughter. Hearing this, Xiao Ye was a bit bewildered. "You're exorcising evil spirits? Then what are you holding in your hand?" This time, it was the mother who couldn't understand. Couldn't he see that it was a piece of gold? And Xiao Ye was already stunned at this moment, because he felt like he had discovered a crucial clue. At that time, he and his eldest brother had analyzed the gold nugget in the boy's stomach, and even once suspected that these golds were used by their colleagues 300 years ago to suppress evil and transform Shang. But this was just a guess at the time, because they hadn't found any records in any classics that linked gold and Shang. Could it be said that there are still some little-known secret methods for suppressing Shang in this world? Thinking of this, Xiao Ye couldn't help but ask, "Madam, where did you hear that gold can be used to exorcise evil spirits?" Unexpectedly, the mother said matter-of-factly that in their place there has always been this saying that wiping the body with gold can ward off evil. But as she spoke, she seemed to suddenly realize something. This young man kept mentioning gold in every sentence. Perhaps he meant something by it. So she quickly said, "As long as they can cure her daughter, this piece of gold will be considered as a thank you gift." Hearing this, Xiao Ye was immediately embarrassed. He quickly waved his hands repeatedly, explaining that he didn't mean that. But just then, suddenly, scolding sounds from the old Taoist priest came from the living room. It turned out that, busy working, Zhang Zha accidentally tripped over the ink line laid by the old Taoist priest. This naturally made Master Matian bristle with anger. Zhang Zha was startled. So, The task of apologizing and smoothing things over fell to Xiao Ye, but third brother was being a bit unfair. Seeing his disciple being bullied, he immediately felt sorry for him, caught him, and started comforting him. What's even more infuriating is, these two guys were still chummy, with arms around each other's shoulders, as if nothing had happened. One of them stepped on several ink lines and swaggered away. Helplessly, Xiao Ye didn't even need to turn around. He immediately apologized 3 times in a row again. Seeing this situation, Master Matian, exasperated, was truly out of options. He could only angrily scold them a few times, then went back to work again. It wasn't dark yet, but several crows flew onto the trees outside. It's unclear if they were Big Brother's crows, while Zhang Zha was still carefully patrolling the room. At this moment, he arrived at the kitchen, but as soon as he opened the cabinet door, he felt a dark shadow suddenly dart out. Startled, he quickly got up to check, but found nothing again. However, he saw that Master Matian was vigorously shaking a bell, muttering incantations. It sounded somewhat like an unknown jingle. Even, he seemed to faintly hear within it something like 5 thunder whip and other terms. Hearing this, third brother, with a disdainful look, secretly signaled to Xiao Ye and said, "This old Taoist priest, not very good." Xiao Ye smiled. He didn't really care, because he could tell this old Taoist was still all right, and was indeed wholeheartedly trying to help. But strangely, ever since the old Taoist priest recited the words wronged soul after death, his voice suddenly started to tremble. And at this moment, Zhang Zha obviously still knew nothing, because somehow he suddenly had a relapse of his old professional habit. Unconsciously, he started helping to fix the faucet for someone. By the time he realized it, the old Taoist priest's bell sound had already started to become chaotic. Suddenly, he felt something was wrong behind him. But just as he turned his head, a strange force suddenly attacked. Zhang Zha was caught off guard, and a scratch of blood instantly appeared on his forehead. Even his body was knocked to the ground along with it. When he struggled to get up, he heard strange noises in his ears. Only then did he see that Master Matian was standing in front of him at some point, still holding the bell, telling him to get lost quickly. However, just at this moment, a pair of large hands suddenly appeared, directly pressed down on the old Taoist priest's head. In an instant, blue light flared up. The old Taoist priest trembled all over, as if electrocuted. After a moment, a child-sized dark shadow escaped from his body. At that moment, Zhang Zha seemed to see the appearance of that dark shadow. The old Taoist priest collapsed to the ground with a thud, while Xiao Ye, still posing as if to help someone up, said apologetically, "Oops, how come I didn't catch it?" And Zhang Zha's so-called master seemed a bit angry, unsure if it was because his disciple was injured and he wanted to protect him, or if he was angry that this spirit was too bold, daring to come out before dark. It seems this resentment is quite strong. Xiao Ye smiled and expressed agreement. He concernedly asked about Zhang Zha's injury. After learning that it was not serious, he asked another question, which was, "Did you see who hit you just now?" Zhang Zha blankly nodded. then couldn't help but look towards the photo hanging on the wall. Huangbai Village. It has come after all. Although Little Ka's mother sincerely warned, strongly advising the three of them against going to this village. But they had to come, because this village might hold a way to turn the Shang people back to normal. And this is what concerns Zhang Zha the most. However, this remote little village appears desolate no matter how you look at it. Could there really be such a method? Xiao Ye wasn't sure, but felt somewhat certain, because he saw a tall Ferris wheel in the distance. From this, it seems this place isn't far from that abandoned amusement park. And it's also where their fellow disciples buried that boy 300 years ago. Thinking about this, Xiao Ye became incredibly confident in his intuition. So now, let's have a look around first. However, there's a problem now, which is that someone is missing. Xiao Ye stared helplessly at his third brother, snoring like thunder in the car. And annoyed, he yelled Old 8 a few times. But the snoring from inside the car remained unchanged, completely ignoring him. Understanding his third brother's personality well, Xiao Ye had a sudden idea, and immediately muttered to himself, "Oh dear, looks like he's fallen asleep. But, you know what? I heard this Huangbai Village has gold mines. All right, Zhang Zha, go to the trunk and get a shovel." In the next moment, before Zhang Zha could even move a step, he saw that Master had already shouldered a shovel and darted ahead of them. Even while walking, he even casually started asking about gold prices. But just then, a dark figure suddenly tumbled from the road, and shouting for them to stop. They looked intently, and then realized the newcomer was that old Taoist priest. As soon as this old Taoist priest got closer, he collapsed to the ground with a thud, and sweating profusely, he begged them to take him along. What's going on here? This sudden scene left them all puzzled. Has this old Taoist priest gone crazy? Seeing that they were unmoved, the old Taoist sighed and began to reveal his true identity. He said he wasn't some Zhongnan heavenly master. That was purely a self-proclaimed fake title. Because in this line of work, without a reputation, nobody would hire him. So he was forced to resort to this wandering deception. Earlier today, he did indeed see that there was something sinister in that house. So he planned to help them with exorcism, and to earn some money for food to fill his stomach that hadn't eaten for 2 days. But he never thought he'd be not only less skilled than the Shang, but instead he was possessed by that sinister entity. So, it's still his own fault for being untalented. Having joined a master's sect since childhood, but never understanding the knack, and eventually being advised to leave the mountain by his master. Not giving up, he sought learning everywhere. Instead, he was deceived by a bunch of swindlers, and repeatedly exploited by a bunch of swindlers. Fortunately, today in his twilight years, he finally met true masters. He clearly remembered that the 3 people before him not only saved that little girl, but also drove away all the sinister entities from the house, and even repeatedly rescued him, this good-for-nothing old Taoist, from the clutches of sinister entities. So at that moment, he had already made up his mind. Having said this, The old Taoist looked up at Zhang Zha, standing in the middle, and then directly started hugging his leg. He said tearfully, only hoping that they would take him along, because he genuinely just wanted to learn some skills to help those in suffering. Xiao Ye didn't answer directly, but instead asked with a smile how the old Taoist knew they were here. Hearing this, the old Taoist sighed and said he had run all the way here. As soon as these words came out, Xiao Ye's eyes widened in astonishment. More than 50 kilometers! This old Taoist, having not eaten for 2 days, could still run all the way here? He's really something. Different from Xiao Ye's shock, Old Eight looked grave instead. After a moment of contemplation, he suddenly spoke, asking for the old Taoist's name. Upon hearing this, the old Taoist subconsciously began to introduce himself, saying, "I am Zhongnan Heavenly Master. No. My name is Modezan." Unexpectedly, Old Eight didn't mind the old Taoist's almost habitual slip of the tongue, but just calmly said good. But in the next moment, he suddenly put his arm around the old Taoist's shoulder and said, "From today onwards, Ma Tianchuang is my disciple." The old Taoist was instantly stunned. "Ma Tianchuang? Who's that?" Fortunately, the quick-witted Zhang Zha quietly told him, "It means you." Ma Dezin understood immediately. He immediately bowed deeply. And of course, the apprentice ceremony was essential. Old Eight immediately bestowed the shovel in his hand upon old Taoist Ma. Subsequently, the group of four walked towards Huangbai Village. Through Zhang Zha's introduction, he learned that the handsome guy with glasses was their Shishu martial uncle, named Xiao Ye, and Master naturally wouldn't forget to chime in, saying Zhang Zha was old Taoist's Naza martial brother. Hearing this, Zhang Zha was too lazy to correct the name, and instead told the old Taoist with embarrassment that he himself had only arrived recently. Actually, strictly speaking, their apprenticeship times were on the same day. But as they chatted, they stopped talking in unison, because the surrounding environment was eerily quiet. Most of the houses in the village were dark and silent, obviously uninhabited. However, under a large tree by a street lamp, sat a few freelancers enjoying the cool air. And so, a good show began. Xiao Ye took the lead and asked for directions, saying they were tourists from out of town, because two friends were suffering badly from car sickness and had no choice but to come here, asking if there was a pharmacy or something similar in the village. Unexpectedly, those few people were completely silent, only waving their hands repeatedly. It seemed there was no pharmacy here. Xiao Ye wasn't annoyed, and asked them again if there were any B&Bs or hotels in the village where they could conveniently spend the night. This time, those people became a little impatient, not only saying no coldly, but also pointing to the empty small buildings in front of them, saying the village was going to be demolished, and almost everyone here had left. Now only some elderly people living alone were left. Hearing these words, Zhang Zha and old Taoist Ma, who were pretending to be sick, instantly sobered up. Just like Xiao Ye, their hearts were filled with questions. Could it be that the village chief didn't plan to help these old people at all? But unexpectedly, as soon as he asked this, The faces of the villagers instantly turned gloomy. Without a word, they got up and left, obviously not wanting to say anything more. Looking at it this way, this Huangbai Village, just like Little Ka's mother said, really did have significant problems. And Zhao also thought of what that gang leader had once said, that the coffin was sold to him by the village chief here. So Zhao really wanted to know if the current village chief still sold coffins. Since the villagers were unwilling to help, they could only rely on their own abilities to find the village chief's house. However, just as they were about to go deeper into the village, Zhang Zha noticed something was wrong. Turning his head sharply, he then realized, under a dark building, stood a person who looked like a miner. Startled, he quickly patted Xiao Ye's shoulder. But actually, Zhao had already noticed that miner a long time ago. And he also knew that it was a Shang that had been following them for several minutes. Hearing this, Zhang Zha asked hesitantly, "Is it following us to do something?" Unexpectedly, Zhao jokingly said, "I don't know. Why don't you go ask it?" Zhang Zha was immediately startled. To talk to this thing, he wouldn't dare. But unexpectedly, that miner suddenly raised an arm and pointed in a direction. This action made them all momentarily stunned. Could it be that this ghost is leading them? Following the miner's direction, they saw a small hill and a small courtyard. As everyone was still finding it strange, the miner suddenly turned around and walked towards the direction he pointed. It was clearly like he was leading the way. But he only took 2 steps. Suddenly, he vanished. Then, Zhang Zha and the others saw several people coming out of the darkness. It seemed they were carrying something. Leading them was a bald, middle-aged man. Looking at his fat face and big ears, he definitely has some influence. So Zhao greeted them. But just then, several villagers carrying things shouted village chief to the bald man, saying something about the last box being moved. Now Zhao heard it clearly. It's like finding it without even trying. It came so easily. After dismissing the villagers, the bald village chief turned back to look at the people in front of him, asking them what they wanted to ask. After Zhao reconfirmed the identity of the person in front of him as the village chief, he planned to ask about the doubt in his mind. But before he could speak, the village chief's face changed. He stared, shocked, at something behind Zhao. Seeing this, Zhao and the others immediately felt something was wrong, because a terrifying black shadow had already appeared on the ground. Alarmed, they turned around. Only then did they realize that behind them, without them knowing when, a terrifying guy had appeared. Looking at this height, a question suddenly popped into Zhang Zha's mind. With that height, you'd think he'd play basketball. Fortunately, this giant didn't say a word. He just brushed past them and walked away. Unexpectedly, he turned out to be the village chief's son. The bald village chief looked around, clearly worried. Worried that his son might encounter danger in the dark. Suddenly, he saw a large patch of blood on his son's elbow and immediately exclaimed in shock. Unexpectedly, his son just coldly said, "Not my blood." But since his son is back, then the village chief was too lazy to pay attention to the people in front of him. and instead turned around and dragged his son back inside. However, even though the scene just now was very strange, it still gave Xiao and the others the creeps. Because just now they didn't notice when exactly this big guy came behind them. At this moment, the old Taoist priest seemed to have discovered something strange. He turned around and stared at the small hill and the houses below. Frowning, he said something was off. Xiao became curious upon hearing this, wanting to see what exactly the old Taoist priest had discovered. But the old Taoist priest was still lost in thought, saying there's something seriously wrong with the houses.
对不起，您拨打的用户暂时无法接通，请稍后再拨。
Sorry, the subscriber you dialed cannot be connected for the moment.